Jake Mitchell stood at the viewing port of the transport ship, watching the massive space station grow larger as they approached. The Galactic Defense Academy looked like a metal city floating in the darkness of space, its lights twinkling like stars. His hands shook as he gripped his single bag of belongings. At 19 years old, Jake was smaller than most guys his age. Back home in Montana, people always said he looked like he was still in high school. Now surrounded by cadets from different planets, he felt even smaller. The Draknor cadets were 8 feet tall with muscles like tree trunks. The insect-like Zephyrians moved with lightning speed, their armor-like skin gleaming under the ship's lights. Even the other humans on the transport were bigger and stronger than Jake. "First time seeing aliens, farm boy?" asked Troy Williams, a tall human cadet from New York. He laughed as Jake stumbled when the ship docked. "Maybe you should have stayed home milking cows." Jake said nothing. He had heard worse back on Earth during the selection tests. Everyone wondered how someone like him had made it into the most elite military academy in the galaxy. Jake wondered the same thing. The docking bay was chaos. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species moved through the metal corridors. Jake followed the crowd, trying not to get stepped on by the massive Draknor or knocked over by the fast-moving Zephyrians. His academy uniform felt too big on his thin frame. "Jake Mitchell?" A woman's voice cut through the noise. Jake turned to see a human officer with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She wore the uniform of a captain. "I'm Captain Lisa Barnes. Follow me." Jake hurried after her through the crowded halls. Other cadets stared at him, some laughing quietly. He heard whispers in different alien languages, but the meaning was clear from their tone. They were making fun of him. "Don't listen to them," Captain Barnes said without looking back. "Half of them won't make it through the first month." They entered a large room filled with weapons and training equipment. Jake had never seen anything like it. Energy weapons hung on the walls next to traditional blades from different worlds. Training dummies were scattered around the room, some still smoking from recent practice sessions. "Pick up that pulse rifle," Captain Barnes ordered, pointing to a weapon on the nearest rack. Jake reached for it and nearly fell over. The rifle was twice as heavy as anything he had ever held. His arms shook as he tried to lift it properly. "Can't even hold a standard weapon," said a deep voice behind him. Jake turned to see a massive Draknor cadet watching him. The alien's reptilian face showed something that might have been amusement. "I am Zeth Kara. It seems we are roommates." Jake set the rifle down carefully. "Nice to meet you." Zeth Kara's yellow eyes studied Jake like he was looking at a strange insect. "You are very small for a warrior race." "Humans aren't really a warrior race," Jake said quietly. "Then why are you here?" It was a good question. Jake had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times. He had scored high on the academic tests, but everyone knew the academy was about fighting. His application had been accepted, but Jake suspected it was some kind of mistake. The next few days were a nightmare. Every morning started with physical training. Jake couldn't keep up with the running. He couldn't lift the weights. During combat practice, he was knocked down again and again. The other cadets didn't even try to hide their laughter anymore. "Maybe the humans sent him as a joke," Jake heard one Zephyrian say to another. "Or maybe they're trying to show us how weak their species really is," replied his friend. During weapons training, Jake's hands were too small to grip most of the alien weapons properly. During hand-to-hand combat, he was paired with cadets who could lift him with one hand. Each day ended with Jake covered in bruises and dirt, while his classmates barely looked tired. His roommate Zeth Kara tried to be kind, but Jake could see the confusion in the alien's eyes. In Draknor culture, only the strongest warriors were chosen for elite training. The idea of a weak fighter being selected made no sense to him. "Perhaps you should speak to the instructors," Zeth Kara suggested one evening, as Jake applied ice to his latest bruises. "Maybe there was an error in your selection." Jake had thought about it. It would be easy to quit and go home. His family would understand. Everyone would understand. But something inside him refused to give up. The lowest point came during the first major combat assessment. All the cadets were tested in single combat against training instructors. Jake watched as his classmates fought with skill and power. The Draknor used their strength to overwhelm opponents. The Zephyrians moved like lightning, striking before their enemies could react. The crystal-like Ashanti manipulated energy fields to create shields and weapons. When Jake's turn came, he faced Instructor Crix, a mid-level Zephyrian warrior. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake tried to dodge, but he was too slow. He tried to block, but he was too weak. Crix knocked him down with a casual swipe of his armored hand. Insufficient, Crix announced to the watching crowd. This human lacks the basic requirements for combat training. Jake lay on the mat, staring up at the metal ceiling. Around him, he could hear cadets from different species talking in their own languages, but he knew they were talking about him. The weak human, the mistake, the joke. That night, Jake sat alone in the academy's library. Most cadets spent their free time in the recreation areas, but Jake preferred the quiet of the computer terminals. He was looking through the academy's historical archives when something caught his attention. It was old footage from Earth's military history. Videos of human soldiers in wars he had studied in school. But these weren't the big battles with tanks and planes. These were smaller fights. Humans hiding in jungles, setting traps, using the environment against stronger enemies. Soldiers who won fights not because they were the strongest, but because they were smart and never gave up. Jake watched video after video. Humans fighting, in mountains, deserts, and cities, always outnumbered, always facing stronger enemies, but somehow they found ways to win. Interesting choice of study material, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see Captain Barnes watching the screen. I was just looking at old battles. These aren't just old battles, she said, sitting down next to him. This is how humans fight when we have to. When we can't match our enemies in strength or speed, we find other ways. She paused the video. On an image of soldiers moving through a forest. You know what I see when I look at you, Cadet Mitchell? Jake shook his head. I see a human who hasn't learned how to be human yet. Captain Barnes stood up. Report to Training Room 7 tomorrow at 500 hours. We're going to fix that. As she walked away, Jake looked back at the screen. The soldiers in the video didn't look like the massive Draknor or the fast Zephyrians. They looked like regular people. They looked like him. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake smiled. Maybe there was more than one way to be a warrior. Jake arrived at Training Room 7 before dawn. The room was smaller than the main combat areas, with mirrors on the walls and simple training equipment. Captain Barnes was already there, setting up what looked like an obstacle course made from everyday objects. You're early, she said without looking up. Good. We have a lot of work to do. For the next hour, Captain Barnes didn't teach Jake how to punch harder or run faster. Instead, she showed him how to move quietly, how to use shadows, and how to make himself hard to see. She taught him to study his opponents before fighting them. Every species has patterns, she explained as they watched videos of different alien fighting styles. The Draknor always charge straight forward. They're strong, but they think in straight lines. The Zephyrians are fast, but they have blind spots because of how their eyes are placed. Jake started taking notes. Real notes like he was studying for a test. He wrote down everything Captain Barnes taught him about alien anatomy, their cultural fighting styles, and their weaknesses. Why didn't anyone teach us this in regular combat class, Jake asked. Because most instructors think fighting is about being stronger than your enemy, Captain Barnes said. But humans survived on Earth by being smarter, not stronger. We hunted animals 10 times our size by working together and using our brains. The regular training sessions were still difficult. Jake still got knocked down in combat practice. He still couldn't lift the heavy weapons, but now he watched everything differently. When Zeth Kara sparred with other Draknor cadets, Jake noticed that they always telegraphed their moves with small shoulder movements. When the Zephyrians fought, he saw that they always favored their right side because of how their arms were built. His new human friend, Danny Ross, noticed the change first. Danny was small too, but he was training to be a tech specialist, so no one expected him to be a great fighter. You're different in combat class now, Danny said one evening as they ate dinner. You're not just trying to survive anymore. You're studying everyone. Jake nodded. Captain Barnes is teaching me that there's more than one way to fight. 3 weeks into his special training, something changed. Jake was sparring with a mid-level Draknor cadet named Koroth. As usual, the alien was much stronger and had knocked Jake down twice already. But this time, Jake noticed something. Koroth always paused for a split second before attacking, shifting his weight to his back foot. When Koroth charged again, Jake didn't try to block or dodge away. Instead, he stepped to the side at the exact moment Koroth committed to his attack. The big alien stumbled past him, off balance. Jake didn't try to hurt Koroth, but for the first time, he had made an opponent miss completely. The watching cadets went quiet. It wasn't a big victory, but it was something no one had seen from Jake before. "Interesting," said Instructor Crix, the Zephyrian who had defeated Jake so easily in his first assessment. "The small human is learning." But the real change came during a routine sparring session between Danny and Zethkara. They were practicing with training weapons when Zethkara's blade slipped and cut Danny's arm. It wasn't a serious injury, but Danny cried out and fell to his knees, holding his bleeding arm. Something snapped inside Jake's mind. He had been watching from the side, taking notes as usual. But when he saw his friend hurt and scared, a cold feeling washed over him. Everything became very clear and very quiet. He could see every person in the room, their positions, their weapons, their weaknesses. Jake moved without thinking. He picked up a training stick and walked toward Zethkara, who was apologizing and trying to help Danny. "It's okay," Zethkara was saying. "I did not mean to," Jake hit him. It wasn't a hard hit. Jake still wasn't strong enough to hurt a Draknor with raw power, but he hit Zethkara exactly where Captain Barnes had taught him the Draknor neck was. Sensitive. Zethkara stumbled backward, surprised and confused. "Jake, stop," Danny called out. "It was an accident." But Jake wasn't listening to Danny anymore. He was in a different state of mind, one where everything was about the fight. He could see that Zethkara was confused and off balance. He could see the exact spots where the big alien was vulnerable. Most importantly, he could see fear in Zethkara's yellow eyes. Jake attacked again, not with anger, but with cold calculation. He used Zethkara's size against him, making the big alien turn and stumble. He struck at pressure points Captain Barnes had shown him. He moved in ways that made it hard for Zethkara to use his strength advantage. The other cadets stopped their own sparring to watch. This wasn't the weak human they knew. This was someone else entirely. Instructor Crix stepped into the ring. "That is enough." Jake turned to face the Zephyrian instructor, still in that cold, focused state. For a moment, Crix stepped backward. There was something in Jake's eyes that hadn't been there before. "The human is hurt," Jake said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Someone must answer for that." "It was an accident, Cadet Mitchell," Crix said carefully. "Your friend is not seriously injured." Jake looked at Danny, who was being treated by the medical officer. The cold feeling started to fade, and he became himself again. He dropped the training stick and stepped back, confused by what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he said to Zethkara. "I don't know what came over me." Zethkara rubbed his neck where Jake had hit him. "You fought differently just now, like a different person." Word of the incident spread quickly through the academy. Dr. Sam Green, a human researcher who studied combat psychology, called Jake to his office the next day. "Tell me about what you felt during the sparring incident," Dr. Green said as he took notes. Jake struggled to explain it. "It was like everything became very clear. I could see things I normally can't see. But I also felt cold, like I didn't care about anything except winning the fight." Dr. Green nodded. "We call it a combat state. Some humans can enter it naturally when they feel threatened or when someone they care about is in danger. It's related to our old survival instincts." "Is it normal?" "For humans, more normal than most people think. Your ancestors survived by being able to switch from peaceful farmers to deadly fighters when they needed to. Most modern humans never access that state because we don't need to." Jake thought about this. "Captain Barnes said I needed to learn how to be human." She was right. And from what I've heard, you're starting to figure it out. The next few days were strange. Jake still lost most of his fights in regular training, but now his opponents took him more seriously. Even when he lost, he was making them work harder. He was landing hits that surprised them. Most importantly, he was making them think about him as a real opponent, not just a weak human. Zethkara was different around him now too. Not unfriendly, but more careful, more respectful. "You have something dangerous inside you," the big alien said one evening as they prepared for sleep. "My people have stories about warriors who seem weak until they are pushed too far. We fear such warriors more than the obviously strong ones." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He was still the same person who struggled with heavy weapons and got tired during long runs. But he was starting to understand that maybe being human meant something different than he had thought. Captain Barnes seemed pleased with his progress. "You're learning to use what you have instead of trying to be what you're not," she told him. "That's the first step to becoming truly dangerous." Jake wasn't sure he wanted to be dangerous, but he was starting to understand that in a place like the Galactic Defense Academy, dangerous might be the only way to survive. News of Jake's unusual fighting style spread through the academy faster than he expected. Within a week, instructors from different species were requesting special combat scenarios to test what they called the human anomaly. Jake didn't like being called an anomaly, but he couldn't deny that something was changing inside him. The first special test came from Commander Veltar, an Ashanti instructor whose crystal-like body could create energy shields and weapons. The Ashanti were known for their honor-based combat, with strict rules about fair fighting and respect for opponents. "We will test the humans' abilities in a controlled environment," Commander Veltar announced to a gathering of instructors and senior cadets. Single combat, traditional rules. Jake entered the combat ring feeling nervous. Commander Veltar was not just any instructor. He was considered one of the best fighters in the academy. His crystal body gleamed under the lights as he created an energy sword with his bare hands. "Begin," called the referee. Jake didn't attack immediately. Instead, he circled the ring, watching how Commander Veltar moved. The Ashanti followed him with the energy sword raised, waiting for Jake to make the first move. This was their way. Honorable, patient, traditional. But Jake had been studying Ashanti culture in his free time. He knew they valued certain fighting, positions and movements that were considered sacred. He also knew they had specific responses to different types of attacks because of their rigid honor code. Jake suddenly dropped to the ground and rolled toward Commander Veltar's feet. It was not an honorable attack. It was something a desperate animal might do. Commander Veltar stepped back in disgust, exactly as Jake had hoped. "Fight with honor, human," Commander Veltar said. Jake ignored him and attacked again, this time using movements he had copied from watching Earth videos of street fights. He grabbed dirt from the floor and threw it. He feinted attacks and then ran away. He made noises and faces designed to confuse his opponent. The watching cadets were shocked. This wasn't how fights were supposed to happen at the academy. This was wild, unpredictable, and somehow terrifying. Commander Veltar became frustrated. His energy sword flickered as his concentration wavered. Jake could see the exact moment when the Ashanti's honor-based training became a weakness instead of a strength. Jake entered his combat state again. Everything became cold and clear. He could see that Commander Veltar expected him to fight like the other species, with rules, with honor, with predictable patterns. But Jake was human, and humans had survived by doing whatever it took to win. The fight ended when Jake used Commander Veltar's own ceremonial fighting stance against him. He mimicked the sacred positions in the wrong order, which confused and angered the Ashanti so much that he made a critical mistake. Jake slipped past his guard and touched a pressure point that Captain Barnes had taught him, causing Commander Veltar's energy sword to disappear. The silence in the room was complete. "The human wins," the referee announced, sounding confused. "Commander." Veltar looked at Jake with something between respect and horror. "Your fighting style is disturbing," he said quietly. "You use our own traditions against us." Jake felt the cold combat state fading away, leaving him confused and a little scared of what he had done. "I'm sorry if I offended you." "You did not offend me. Commander Veltar replied. You terrified me. After that fight, everything changed. The alien cadets no longer laughed at Jake. Instead, they watched him with careful eyes like they were looking at a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. Even during normal activities like eating or studying, Jake could feel them. Watching him, Zethkara became increasingly uncomfortable around his roommate. You are not the same person who arrived here months ago, he said one evening. During fights, you become something else. Something that thinks differently than other beings. Jake wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He was starting to notice the changes himself. During combat situations, his mind worked differently. He saw opponents not as people, but as collections of weaknesses to exploit. He thought about their cultures, their fears, their instincts, and how to use all of it against them. Dr. Sam Green called Jake for regular meetings now. Your brain scans show unusual activity during combat scenarios, he explained, showing Jake complex charts and graphs. It's like you develop different personalities for fighting different species. Is that bad? It's unprecedented, Dr. Green said. You're essentially becoming a specialized weapon against each type of opponent you face. But Jake, you need to be careful. Some of my colleagues are worried that you might be losing your baseline humanity. The warning came too late. During a major training exercise designed to test teamwork, something went wrong. Jake was paired with cadets from different species for a complex mission simulation. They had to work together to infiltrate a mock enemy base and complete objectives while being hunted by instructors. Jake's teammates wanted to use standard military tactics. Careful planning, coordinated attacks, proper communication. But Jake could see faster, more effective ways to complete the mission. Ways that used the environment, psychological warfare, and the enemy's own expectations against them. We should stick to the plan, said Ryan Lee, a human cadet who had volunteered to work with Jake despite warnings from other students. The plan is too slow, Jake replied, his voice taking on the cold tone that appeared during combat. I can complete the mission alone in half the time. He was right. Jake slipped away from his team and infiltrated the enemy base using methods that violated every rule of conventional warfare. He used the ventilation system, disabled security by exploiting programming flaws he had memorized, and eliminated enemies by attacking their psychological weaknesses rather than using weapons. When the exercise ended, Jake had completed all objectives while his teammates were still planning their first move. The instructors watching the simulation were silent. How did you know about the ventilation system weakness? Asked General Kate Morrison, a high-ranking human officer who had come to observe the exercise. I studied the base plans for 3 days, Jake replied. I also researched the psychology of the species we were supposed to be fighting. Once I understood how they think, I could predict their responses. General Morrison exchanged looks with the other instructors. And your teammates? Jake looked confused. What about them? You abandoned them to complete the mission alone. For a moment, Jake's normal personality returned. He looked shocked at what he had done. I didn't think about them once I started the mission. I was focused on winning. That night, Ryan Lee confronted Jake in their shared study area. What happened to you during that exercise? You looked right through us like we didn't exist. Jake tried to explain, but he wasn't sure he understood it himself. When I'm in combat mode, everything becomes about completing the objective. I don't think about anything else, including your friends. Jake didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. Word of Jake's performance reached the highest levels of Academy Command. A special meeting was called with instructors from all species to discuss what they called the human problem. His methods are effective but disturbing, reported Commander Veltar. He fights without honor, using our own cultural values against us. He shows no concern for teammates during missions, added General Morrison. His focus becomes completely selfish. He has developed multiple combat personalities, Dr. Green explained, each one designed to defeat specific types of opponents. But we're losing the original Jake Mitchell in the process. Captain Barnes defended Jake, but even she seemed worried. He's becoming what humans become when pushed to their evolutionary limits. The question is whether we can control it. The Academy faced a difficult decision. Jake had become their most effective combat trainee, capable of defeating opponents who were physically superior in every way. But his methods violated the honor codes of multiple species, and his psychological state during combat was becoming increasingly alien, even to other humans. As Jake sat in his room that night, studying files on new alien species and their weaknesses, he didn't notice Zeth Kara packing his belongings. His roommate had requested a transfer, unable to sleep in the same room as someone who had become so unpredictable. Jake was alone now, but he barely noticed. He was too busy preparing for whatever test they would give him next, planning how to win against opponents he had never faced before. In his mind, he was no longer the weak farm boy from Montana. He was becoming something else entirely, something that even he didn't fully understand. The tribunal meeting took place in the Academy's largest conference room. Representatives from every species sat around a circular table, with Jake standing in the center. He felt smaller than ever, but not in the same way he had when he first arrived. Now he was small because he was alone, facing judgment from beings who feared what he had become. Admiral Ben Taylor, the highest-ranking human officer in the fleet, spoke first. "Cadet Mitchell, you stand accused of violating the honor codes of multiple species, abandoning your teammates during missions, and developing combat methods that are considered disturbing by your instructors." Jake looked around the room. Commander Veltar wouldn't meet his eyes. The Draknor representative kept shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Even Captain Barnes looked worried. "Do you understand why you're here?" Admiral Taylor asked. "Because I win fights," Jake replied simply. The room went quiet. It wasn't the answer they expected. "You win fights using methods that disturb your opponents," said the Zephyrian representative. "You exploit cultural values that are sacred to our species. You abandon your teammates," added the Draknor representative. "In our culture, a warrior who leaves his battle brothers is no warrior at all." Jake felt the familiar cold feeling starting to creep into his mind. The combat state was trying to activate, analyzing each speaker as a potential opponent. He forced it down, trying to stay himself. "I complete the missions," he said. "Isn't that what matters? Not if you lose your humanity in the process," Dr. Green said quietly from his seat at the table. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed as an emergency announcement echoed through the corridors. "All personnel to battle stations. Unknown hostile vessels approaching the Academy." "This is not a drill." Admiral Taylor stood up immediately. "The tribunal is suspended. All cadets report to emergency stations." But as the representatives filed out of the room, Lieutenant Marie Collins, a special operations officer, approached Jake. "Admiral Taylor wants to see you in the command center. Now." Jake followed her through corridors filled with running cadets and instructors. The command center was chaos, with officers shouting orders and screens showing tactical information. Outside the viewing ports, Jake could see strange ships approaching the Academy, vessels unlike anything in the galactic database. "Unknown species," Admiral Taylor explained as Jake approached. "They've ignored all communication attempts and are moving into attack formation. We've never seen technology like theirs." Jake studied the approaching ships on the main screen. They were sleek and organic-looking, unlike the mechanical designs of known species. Their movement patterns were unlike anything he had seen before. "What do you want me to do?" Jake asked. Admiral Taylor looked at him seriously. "We're going to test you one more time, Cadet Mitchell, but this time it's real." The plan was simple but dangerous. Jake would take a small infiltration craft and attempt to disable the lead enemy ship from the inside. It was exactly the kind of mission his training had prepared him for, one person against superior opponents using unconventional methods. "You'll be completely alone," Lieutenant Collins warned as they prepared the small ship. "No backup, no communication once you're inside their vessel. You'll have to rely entirely on your own abilities." Jake nodded. For the first time in months, he felt calm. This was what he had been becoming, a weapon designed for impossible missions. The infiltration craft was tiny, barely large enough for one person. Jake piloted it toward the enemy fleet, using the confusion of the battle to slip past their defenses. The Academy's larger ships were engaging the aliens in conventional combat, but Jake could see they were losing. The enemy technology was too advanced. Jake docked with the lead enemy ship and cut his way inside. The interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. Curved walls that seemed to pulse with life, corridors that twisted in impossible directions, and a strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He was in his deepest combat state now, his mind analyzing everything he saw. The ship's design told him about the species that built it. They thought in curves rather than straight lines. They valued organic growth over mechanical precision, and they had senses that humans didn't possess. Jake made his way through the ship, avoiding the alien crew members he encountered. He could see they were insect-like but larger than Zephyrians, with compound eyes and movements that suggested a hive mind mentality. This gave him ideas about how to defeat them. The ship's control center was a vast chamber filled with what looked like living computer systems. The alien crew worked in perfect synchronization, their movements coordinated like a dance. Jake realized they were connected mentally, sharing thoughts and decisions. This was their strength. But Jake could see how to make it their weakness. He had brought a small device that Captain Barnes had given him, a human-made signal jammer designed to disrupt electronic communications. But Jake had a better idea. Instead of jamming their communications, he would overload them. Jake activated the device and began modifying its frequency, using knowledge he had gained from studying different alien technologies. He created a signal that would overwhelm the aliens' shared mental connection, causing confusion and panic. The effect was immediate. The coordinated movements of the alien crew became chaotic. They began bumping into each other, unable to function without their mental link. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by the sensory overload. Jake made his way to what appeared to be the ship's main control system. It was a living computer, pulsing with organic light. He placed explosive charges around its core, set to detonate in 5 minutes. As he ran back toward his infiltration craft, Jake realized something had changed inside him. The cold combat state was still there, but now it felt different. He was still calculating, still analyzing, but he found himself thinking about the Academy and the people there, about Danny and his injury, about Zethkara and his discomfort, about Captain Barnes and her belief in him. Jake reached his ship. Just as the explosives detonated, the enemy vessel shuddered and began to lose power. Without their lead ship coordinating the attack, the other alien vessels became confused and began to retreat. When Jake returned to the Academy, he found the tribunal waiting for him in the docking bay. But their expressions had changed. Instead of fear and judgment, he saw something that looked like respect. "Mission successful," Jake reported to Admiral Taylor. "The enemy fleet is retreating." Admiral Taylor nodded slowly. "How did you do it?" Jake thought for a moment. "I used their strength against them. They were connected mentally, so I overloaded their connection. Once they couldn't communicate, they couldn't fight effectively." "And you figured this out during the mission?" "I've been learning to see how different species think," Jake replied. "Captain Barnes taught me that humans survive by adapting to their enemies." Commander Veltar stepped forward. "Your methods are still disturbing to us," he said. "But today those methods saved our lives." The Draknor representative nodded. "A warrior who wins impossible battles earns respect regardless of his methods." Admiral Taylor made the final decision. "Cadet Mitchell, you will not be expelled from the Academy. Instead, you will be transferred to a new special operations program designed specifically for human, unconventional warfare specialists." Jake felt relief wash over him, but also something else, a sense of purpose. He was no longer just trying to survive at the Academy. He had found what he was meant to become. "Will I be alone in this program?" he asked. Captain Barnes smiled. "Actually, we're going to start training other humans in similar methods. You'll be helping to teach them." As Jake left the command center, he saw Emma Rodriguez, a new human cadet who had just arrived at the Academy. She was small and looked nervous, just like he had been months ago. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Jake Mitchell? I heard you're the human who fights aliens and wins." Jake looked at her and saw himself as he had been, weak, scared, but determined. "I'm just someone who learned how to be human," he said. Emma looked confused. "What does that mean?" Jake smiled. "It means we're not the strongest or the fastest, but we're the most dangerous when we need to be. And I can teach you how." As they walked through the corridors of the academy, Jake noticed that other cadets moved aside to let them pass, not because they were afraid of him anymore, but because they respected what he had become. He was no longer the weak human who had barely qualified for the academy. He was something new, a weapon designed by evolution and sharpened by necessity. The weak human had become a monster in combat training, but he had also remained human where it mattered most. And now he would help others find the same balance.